So this journalist is about to unalive some people so that he can write news articles about the murders. Let me explain. Now the journalist, his name is Vlado, and he lives in a small town in Macedonia, and he's a bit messed up in the head. Apparently, he had always had a super contentious relationship with his late mother, and bro's allegedly got some mommy issues. Cause one day, I guess Vlado finds a way to take out all these frustrations on some women that live in his neighborhood. And so he targets his first victim, this woman, Mitra. Mitra's 64, and she knew Vlado's mom, and Mitra even works as a cleaner just like Vlado's mom worked as a cleaner. But one day, Mitra leaves her place to go to the grocery store, and that is when Vlado shows up. Now, it isn't clear exactly how he goes about this because there are no witnesses. Not sure if he offered her a ride in his car or what, but suddenly, bam, Vlado straight up kidnaps her. And he takes her somewhere, and he starts beating her, and then he essays her. And after that, he keeps her alive for several months, which means he would have had to feed her and take care of her. But ultimately, he finally strangles her with a telephone cord until she's unalived. Then he stuffs her body into a nylon bag and he ties it up with the telephone cord and he dumps it at an abandoned construction site on the outskirts of town. And 2 months after she first disappeared, police finally find Mitra's body in the construction site. So they investigate, and they start accusing these 2 other random guys of the murder. And eventually, they go and arrest those 2 guys. Meanwhile, Vlado isn't even a suspect, so he totally gets away with it. Now, remember how I said Vlado is a journalist? Well, pretty quickly, he starts reporting on the case, and he publishes a news article about Mitra going missing. And he goes and he interviews some of her friends and family members about the crime. He even reports on the trial of the 2 random guys who were wrongly accused of unaliving Mitra. Which, by the way, those 2 guys who were falsely accused, they ultimately both get sentenced to life in prison. But don't feel bad for these 2 guys. Part of why they're murder suspects in the first place is because they actually unalived someone else, a totally different, unrelated guy, which they admitted to. So they get life in prison. Anyway, 3 years pass, and Vlado still hasn't been caught. And he's feeling pretty confident. He's ready to do it all over again. And that is when he sets his sight on this woman. Her name is Ljubica. And Ljubica's 56, and like Mitra, she also works as a cleaner, and she's also familiar with Vlado's mom. So she is just his type. And all these people live in the same small neighborhood, so Vlado and all his victims, they all know each other. But one day, just like Mitra, Ljubica leaves her place to go buy groceries. And that is when Vlado shows up. But suddenly, boom, Vlado just kidnaps her. And then he takes her somewhere, to some secret location. And he ties her up, and he beats her, and he essays her, and he keeps her alive there for about 3 months. And then he finally strangles her with a telephone cord until she's unalived. And 3 months after she had been abducted, police find her body in a nylon bag. She had been dumped in a ravine near the edge of town. And of course, this is a small town in Macedonia. So this murder is huge news. And guess which freelance journalist is right there to cover the story? Vlado. And he's out here, he's interviewing her friends and her family. And 3 days after Ljubica's body is found, he publishes an article about her. And in this article, he actually theorizes that this murder and the Mitra murder might be linked. He's telling on himself. Oh, but Vlado's not done. Because a few months later, he chooses his next victim, this woman, Zvana. And Zvana's 65, and just like the other victims, she's a cleaner. She also knew Vlado's mom, because they all live in the same neighborhood. And one day, she's sitting at home, and ring, she gets a phone call. And it's her friend. And her friend is like, hey, have you heard the news? There's been a horrible car crash, and they're saying your son is involved. So Zvana, she goes and she turns on the news, on the radio. And yeah, there's a report that there's been a horrible car crash involving her son. So Zvana immediately drops everything and she leaves her place. And as she's leaving, her neighbor sees her and he's like, hey, what's going on? And she's like, I think my son was in a horrible car crash. I'm going to the hospital to see if he's there. And then she heads straight for the hospital. And that is the last time anyone sees her. And again, it is speculated that while she's on her way to the hospital, Vlado crosses paths with her. And he likely offers her a ride. And somehow he gets her alone and he kidnaps her. And then he takes her to some unknown location and he beats her up and he essays her and he strangles her with a telephone cord. Then he puts the body in a nylon bag and he ties it up with the same telephone cord he used to unalive her. But after she had left the house that day, that same afternoon, that neighbor that she saw, he gets a knock on the door. And it's Ivana's son. And son asks the neighbor, "Hey, have you seen my mom? I can't find her anywhere." And neighbor's like, "Dude, she went to the hospital because she heard you got in a car accident." Now, of course, son had not, in fact, been in a car accident. So he's like, "What the f*** are you talking about?" And he hadn't been in a horrible car accident because there had been no horrible car accident. It was all a hoax. Now, it is speculated that Vlado, who is a journalist, that he called the local radio news station and reported to them that there had been a car crash and that Ivana's son had been involved. So that radio station would report on it and Ivana would hear it and go out looking for him. And I guess it worked because she did. Regardless, 9 days later, some people find Ivana's body unalived in a pile of trash that had been dumped next to the local soccer field. And 3 days after that, Vlado publishes a news article about the murder in one of the biggest national newspapers in Macedonia. And in this article, he links the murders of all three women, and he's the first person to suggest that there might be a serial killer on the loose. Like I said, bro's telling on himself. I mean, this man is diabolical, and it looks like he's getting away with it. Until... Here's the thing. When Vlado wrote his news article about Ivana's murder, he took things a little too far. For example, in this article, he goes into detail about what type of cord the killer had used, a telephone cord, and how the killer had used the same cord to unalive the victims as he used to tie them up. And none of these details were public information at the time. He even writes about how Ivana had possibly been abducted by two men in a car, and how they made up a story about her son getting in a horrible accident to get her in that car. And so local police, they start to notice, man, this guy's got a lot of insight into these murders. They're like, we've never mentioned that the killer used a telephone cord. And so police naturally get suspicious. And finally, Vlado becomes a suspect. So then police, they go and they test his DNA and they match it with some DNA found on the murder victims, and surprise, surprise, it's a match. So, bam, they arrest Vlado. And I couldn't find a mugshot, so here's an actual photo of him in police custody. But then, 3 days after his arrest, while he's in jail, he's in his cell, and he goes and he dunks his head in a bucket of water, and he drowns. He unalived himself. So, shout out to the bucket, I guess.